guests. On behalf of the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society, today I have a great honor to introduce to yourself our guest speaker, who is the composer, Dr. Chesky Neceski. I will say a few words about Živče before he starts talking about the topic that he has prepared for today. Chesky Neceski was born in Prile, Macedonia in 1967. He moved to Canada at the age of 8, and he was exposed to music, in particular the Macedonian music and folklore, from a very early age. When he was 7, his father bought him a harmonica. His first teacher was his father, who sang the melodies for him, and Živče followed that. He followed these melodies. This was very important for Živče because by following these melodies, he actually learned the melodies by ear. He moved to Canada at the age of 8, and here he started his formal lessons in ordinary accordion at the Royal Conservatory of Music. By the age of 12, he received and he started learning concert accordion. Concert accordion, as Živče was explaining to me, this is sort of a brand new instrument, and it's been invented in the mid-60s approximately of the century. Now, at the age of 14, he started playing professionally for a lot of bands. He played for a Macedonian band, for a Romanian band, for a German band, for a Serbian band, an Italian band. And this actually gave him a solid background in ethnic music. Now, by 1981, at the age of 14, he was interested in music, and he was also playing, and he was participating, especially with the bands. At that point, he went back to Macedonia, and he studied with courtship. Afterwards, he spent the 3 following summers studying under the guidance of this renowned Macedonian musician. In 1987, he studied at the University of Toronto in Bachelor of Composition, where in his first year, because of his experience, he was given a course to teach, a full credit course called World Music Ensembles. Now, for this course, students had to take 2 ensembles and in order to get a full credit. Now, he was actually the one who was leading the Macedonian ensemble, and he taught this course for 6 years during his undergraduate studies and also during his master's degree program. In 1991, he started his master's in composition, and he finished it in 1993. The same year, he was admitted with full scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia at the world-renowned music school to study with world-renowned composer and Pulitzer Prize winner George Crumb. This was a 5-year doctorate program. Now, in this 5-year, actually, Živče was the first one to finish this doctorate program in 3 years instead of 5 years. And not only that, but he also, during that time, he completed another master's degree.
And got married.
Now, at the time, in 1995, Professor Fella was written and was premiered in Philadelphia in Curtis Hall, and was very well received. Now, the reception was so good that it was also programmed for the next following season with the Philadelphia Youth Symphony Orchestra. And this same piece was chosen to compete at the Gaudeamus competition for composers under 30 years of age. Now, this competition is entered by by musicians from all over the world, composers, I mean, from all over the world, and they have thousands and thousands of entries. And then only 15 are actually chosen to compete in the Saudi competition, and his was one of these 15, which is great honor. And Prophets of Pella was one of them. Now, he's also received scholarship to attend Darmstadt Music Festival, and one of his pieces, Regnant Republic, was performed at this festival. He's also had numerous international commissions. The importance now, we would like to make a connection between his compositions and the sort of the historical society, and what we are coming here for is that Živče, in his exposure to the Macedonian folklore and music, is so much into him, it's so much part of him that you can actually see it, hear it in his compositions. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity, chance to hear some of his pieces on the CD, but the Prophets, as soon as you hear it, you know this is a Macedonian composer. Although he was raised in Canada, he did his graduate studies here, undergraduate and graduate studies here. Well, Prophets is unmistakably, it's Macedonian. It's very Macedonian. You can tell this person, this composer is Macedonian. It will tell you. I mean, it's so obvious. He has got his inspiration from the Macedonian music, from the Macedonian everyday folk music, and in another piece, which is he's probably going to be talking about. Also, it's a piece for harp, and you're not going to hear the whole song, like it's Jovano Jovanke, but it's there. But it's there. You have to listen, and then there's something. It's there. So, anyways, just to wrap up with this is that Živče still is involved with the Macedonian community, or by playing in a folk ensemble called Makedonski Melos. However, it's of great importance that he has formed a group called Toronto Chamber Music Players. Now, he's not only the founding member, but he's conducting, he's leading, and he's also performing in this ensemble. And he's planning an inaugural season for 97-98. I hope that many of you will go and hear his music. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce Chesky Neceski.
Boy, I don't know if I can live up to all of that. First of all, actually, I want to thank the Macedonian Historical Society for inviting me here today to speak to you about a subject that is actually very dear at heart to me. The presentation that I'm going to give is going to be basically a historical look at the music and culture and dance of Macedonia, and I'll try to follow some general trends that occurred throughout our history. I want to apologize ahead of time. I did have overheads to accompany this lecture, and now we don't have overheads, so I hope it won't be too dry. Before I begin, I also want to mention a couple of other things. First of all, I want to state that I am not a musicologist. That is a person who studies the history of music. Nor am I an ethnomusicologist, a person who studies the ethnic people's history and their music. Right? I'm a composer. I write music, and that's what I do. But I do have it, I think, in my blood from a very young age. This Macedonian music is very much in my soul, and therefore this lecture, this preparation, I hope will show you my love for this music. I will try to present this lecture in two areas. First, the historical aspect of it, and then at the end I will try to connect it to see how some of these elements appear in the music that I write today. So having said all of that, I can begin to concentrate on the subject at hand. Ethnomusicologists categorize world music cultures as belonging to two main types. The one is to be found in the courts of kings, queens, princesses, and the nobility. An example of this type of music is in the court music of India, for example. Also, similar evolutionary tendencies and developments are to be found in Western church music. Especially after Christ's death. And from this point onward, in the Western world, church music begins to infiltrate and to dominate even the courts of kings. This court music boasts of court musicians and court composers, thank you, whose primary purpose is to furnish music for specific functions and occasions. Elaborate systems of notation are invented to convey and to preserve the musical ideas from generation to generation and from composer to performer. The second type of musical world culture finds its genesis and its dominance in the peasant cultures. Its musicians are the sheep herders who willow a branch and yield the flute as they tend their herd, the farmers who sing as they plow the fields and till the lands, the women who accompany themselves rhythmically, either with thumping mortars when crushing the grains into flour, or with the purring spinning wheels when they spin yarn. Here in peasant cultures, the tradition of passing on their music is oral. No notational system exists. Macedonia has had the benefit of both musical cultures. However, historical records and data are extremely limited, at least for the time being, until the earth yields her treasures and new discoveries identify the musical life of our ancient Macedonians. Musical examples from ancient Macedonia are non-existent. The only evidence of musical life and dance is in drawings, paintings on vases, and occasional mentions in passing in treatises by period writers. For instance, the comment, "The Thracians and Macedonians enjoy their music greatly," was stated by Chrysostom in his Athenian canon when reporting that Philip II and his son Alexander, after a victorious battle against the Athenians and their allies in 338 BC at Chaperoni, sacrificed animals to the Muses in Pieria. This brief statement identifies that the Aegean household had a strong tradition of a musical life and heritage, for the king and his son felt it important and necessary to sacrifice to the gods who presided over the arts. To carry this further, it is well known that Orpheus was one of the greatest singers of the ancient world. His heritage is a Thracian Macedonian one. The legend, according to Thracian lore, where Orpheus originated, states that he was a son of a Thracian king and of Muse Calliope, the daughter of the Macedonian Pierre, who gave birth to the Pierian people. Quote, "His mother gave him a supernatural gift of music, and his instrument was the lyre. When he played and sang, everything animate and inanimate followed him. He moved the rocks and churned the course of rivers, and the wild beasts would go with him." Such are the accounts of his talent and spell. Although Greek writers placed Orpheus as a mythological figure, ascribing him as a god, therefore exaggerating his abilities and accomplishments, in Thrace and eastern Macedonia, it was believed that he was a real person. He was also known in these regions as a teacher. His followers, the Orphics, are known to us as members of closed cult communities, teaching purity, release from earthly and transitory future life and death. The Roman geographer Pompone Mela states that Pieria was the center for musical schools. It is believed that Orpheus' adult life was centered in Pieria. It was in this setting that Orpheus formed his musical school. And we can now see, with the teachings performed in his school, the seedlings being planted for what was later to become the Orpheic cult. With the passage of time, Orpheistic tendencies filtered through religion, philosophy, and the arts. but also, and more importantly for this topic, we can begin to understand the relationship between music, spirituality, and spiritual wholeness for the ancient Macedonians. Further, these Orphaic ideas would eventually find themselves in the Greek religious beliefs, and by the 6th century BC, Orphism was already established in Athens and as far as the Greek colonies in southern Italy. This now sheds a better light as to why Alexander and his royal father would go to Pieria to offer sacrifices to the Muses, and the importance of such a gesture for the deities. A second and more dominant deity also found his beginnings in Thrace, and ended up in Macedonia well before his cult reached the Athenians. This, of course, was Dionysus Bacchus, the wine god, or the deity of agriculture. In the Dionysian ecstasy was the drowning of the individual in the unity with the Godhead, where the soul freed itself not from the body, but from its own ego. Dionysus was the dispenser of the stimulating wine, protector and promoter of growth of plants and entire nature, divine embodiment of all the fullness of life, the idea of the heightened joy of life. History shows that, quote, only gradually and against much opposition did the Dionysian cult penetrate Greece. With acceptance elsewhere, the Dionysian cult was slowly Hellenized. It was particularly the women and the common people who carried the banner in Greece. Homer knew only of the, quote, raging, unquote, state of the Dionysian cult. As Dionysus gained acceptance in Greece, his image became fused with that of the mythological Orpheus. Various other Greek chronicles cited multiple Dionysian festivals in Macedonia. At these Dionysian festivals, the gatherers would not be in temples worshiping, but rather celebrating at the theater. The arts received an unlimited inspiration from the Dionysus cult. The ceremony was at the performance of a tragic dream in an act of worship. The god himself was supposed to be present. Originally, the celebration was a song by a chorus telling of the god. Then a leader would come forward and recite alone, and the chorus would respond. In Greece, this type of worship was picked up with Aeschylus introducing a second actor who answered the first, and Sophocles introducing a third actor, expanding upon the dialogue and developing acting. Thus, theater was well on its way. The song was frenzied revelry, ecstatic, intoxicating, no doubt due to the overindulgence of the new drink, the wine, which was celebrated with wild orgies, we are told, shouting and accompaniment with whirling flutes. Similar was the case outside of the theater and its wooden platform stage, where every spring Dionysian worshippers, mostly made up of female clans, would gather at night on mountain sides, dressed like bulls, with horns and all, for Dionysus was the first to harness a plow to the bull. Therefore, they believed he returned every spring as a bull, and they called themselves by the god's name in song and dance, all the time gouging on his drink. At the height of the frenzy, they threw themselves upon the bull, tore him apart, and devoured him raw. Through his sacrament, they united with the god and received his powers. Here we see dance and theater and music and its integral role in the customs and traditions of the Macedonian people around 700 BC. We know something of the character of the music and dance through statements such as these, even though we haven't as yet discovered any remnants of musical examples from Macedonia. We have seen that to music was ascribed a divine origin through Orpheus in Thrace and Macedonia. For the ancient Macedonians, music had magical powers, as evidenced in the Dionysian ritual just described. Further, people thought music could heal sickness, purify the body and mind, and work miracles in the realm of nature. And this belief was not only held in the Balkans, but also in many parts of the world. And indeed, this belief still exists today in many cultures. And immediately we can see the correlation, for instance, from Old Testament times when David cured Saul's madness by playing the harp in 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 to 23. Or, of course, with the trumpet blasts and shouting that toppled the walls of Jericho, as cited in Joshua. From the earliest times, music was an inseparable part of religious ceremonies. In the cult of Dionysus, the aulos was the characteristic instrument, while in the cult of Orpheus, it was the lyre. Both of these instruments, it is believed, came to the Balkans from Asia Minor. The lyre and its counterpart, the kithara, were instruments with 5 to 7 strings And both were used for solo playing and to accompany the singing and reciting of epic poems. The aulos, a double-piped reed instrument, not a flute, with a shrill, piercing tone, was used in connection with the singing of certain kind of poetry, the dithyramb, which was the hymn to honor Bacchus, out of which it is believed that the Greek drama eventually developed. We do know that this music was always associated with words and dancing, or both. Its melody and rhythm were most intimately bound up with the melody and rhythm of the poetry. Here in the Balkans, and especially Greece, for it is from this region where we do have some remnants of musical examples, about half a dozen, that this correlation between melody and its rhythmical gestures being tied to meter, rhythm, and pitch of the poetry were most closely related. This begins to shed a magnificent light as to the tradition of rhythmical complexities unparalleled anywhere else in the world. Most musical cultures' rhythmical developments were limited to a binary or ternary delineation, with very little, if at all, interaction between these two rhythmical units. What this means is that if a piece began at, say, a binary pattern, a grouping of 2, it would be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so on. And it remained so for the duration of the entire composition. If it began with a ternary pattern, it would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on for its duration, with little or no crossover from one pattern into the other. In the dithyramb, we do know that the musical line, in terms of its speech content and its rhythmical content, followed or closely correlated to the rhythm and melody of the poetry being recited. Thus, the meter changed often. Let me give you an example. If I am to take this very sentence, which I'm saying now, and look at its rhythmic construction, I will notice an overwhelming number of words having 1 or 2 syllables. Actually, in this sentence that I just said, out of 32 words, 23 of the words are 1-syllable words. There are 6 2-syllable words, 2 3-syllable words, and 1 4-syllable word. Therefore, this entire sentence can easily be made to fit in a binary rhythmical pattern. So listen to it. See if I can try to do this now. If I am to take this very sentence, which I am saying now, and look at its rhythmic construction, I will notice an overwhelming number of words having 1 or 2 syllables. Okay. Now, if I take this same sentence and translate it into Macedonian, it loosely becomes the following. So please excuse the translation. Ako јас ја земам ова реченица која што ја искажувам сега и ја погледам нејзината ритмичка конструкција, јас ќе приметам поголем број на зборови кои имаат по 1 или 2 слогови. Now here we have 31 words in my translation, out of which there are only 12 one-syllable words compared to 23 in the English. 7 2-syllable, 8 3-syllable, and 4 4-syllable words. Immediately we see a different syllabic and therefore a different rhythmical construction of the sentence. I guarantee you that if you do this for any other sentence, the result will have similar outcomes. What does this mean? Simply, let's recite the Macedonian sentence now and listen for its rhythmical construction. Ako јас ја земам ова реченица која што ја искажувам сега и ја погледам нејзината ритмичка конструкција, јас ќе приметам поголем број на зборови кои имаат по 1 или 2 слогови. Sorry for that. But I think we can begin. Because of the presence of a greater number of odd-numbered syllabic words from 3 syllables and up, we see more of a shift of metrical pattern between the binary and ternary. This becomes even more interesting when the words themselves have 5 or 7, or even some Macedonian words have 9, and so on. And those interlaced with the 6 and 4-syllable words, of which the current Macedonian language is strewn. Macedonia, for instance, has 5 syllables. Revolucionerni, 7. Now listen for the oh so poetic rhythmical makeup of the following sentence. Ova je Makedonija i neziните idealni revolucionerni ideji koji vladeja u srcetu na nezini od naroden heroj Goce Delčev. Even silly sentences such as the one to follow, Magareto koje ima skršena noga, have an inherent musically poetical rhythmical construction in them. Now, I'm not saying that the Slavic as we know it was the language used by Macedonia in 700 BC or earlier. But this example to me is further evidence that amalgamation occurred between the ancient Macedonians and the Slavs who migrated on their land in the 6th century AD. What do I mean by this? The Slavic strain of languages is present in a huge area from Russia all the way down to Macedonia. Other than Macedonian, no other Slavic peoples have such a strongly developed rhythmical structure in their music. They primarily use binary or ternary with no or very little interaction between these rudimentally rhythmical building blocks. So why then would the Slavs settling in Macedonia have such complex additive rhythmical structures in their music and their Slav cousins to the north have nothing of the sort? The only logical explanation, at least for me, is that a fusion of the ancient Macedonians and the new Macedonians occurred, where the new Macedonians took on many of the ancient Macedonian customs, and the rhythm of their music is but one example of this. I must avert here a little bit and at least mention the recent investigations which are ongoing at looking at the Proto-Greek period or the pre-Greek civilization in the Balkan Peninsula. The findings are extraordinary. I cannot summarize the findings eloquently, but I do refer you to Radivoje Pešic's article, which is entitled On the Scent of Slavic Autochthony in the Balkans. What this primarily concentrates on is, through the research, they do believe that this Proto-Greek period was actually, it had its ties to a Slavic culture coming in from the Carpathian regions well before these Slavs were believed to come to the Balkans, which is around the 6th century AD. So this, they believe, went as far back as about 2,800 years BC. That's all I'll say for that. But further to this article, it is interesting to look at the name, for instance, of Macedonia, or rather Macedon itself. The Greeks claim that it is a Homeric Greek word meaning tall or high. Although true that the inhabitants of the mountain chains and corresponding valleys in Macedonia were tall, at least taller than the Hellenic peoples to the south, it is interesting to look at the accounts of both Herodotus and Strabo, who claim that the main conquering tribe of these peoples, quote, called itself tall men. In other words, Makednoi. And Makednoi, we know that means tall men. Therefore, we can say that this means this was the ancient Macedonian word for tall men. If it were a Greek word, then he would say, we call them tall men, Makednoi. But he said, both Herodotus and Strabo said they called themselves tall men. And there are many other examples of this, which I won't get into here. I apologize for this slight diversion, but I felt it necessary in order to show the link of the present-day Macedonians to their historic ancestors, as well as the link of the music and other cultural traditions. Obviously, more intense research needs to be done in this field, but the lineage is fascinating to follow. We looked at the music and its rhythmical construction, but I also mentioned that the music was tied to dance and drama. The music of religious cults, or of the drama, and of the great public concerts was performed by singers who accompanied their melody with the movements of prescribed dance patterns. What then were these dance patterns like? We can deduce from the linguistic poetry example of above that the rhythm was complex. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume if the melody was accompanied by prescribed dance patterns, it too was a series of complicated, intricate dance steps. An account by Xenophon in his Anabasis of 401 BC describes a Macedonian dance. He tells of how music flourished in Macedonia and how they liked to dance with high leaps in full army dress, accompanied by the flute, leaping and striking each other with their swords. Although it cannot be said for certain which particular dance he is describing, it can be deduced by examining some of today's Macedonian dances. It is my guess that either the Aramisko or the Lusalisko oro is in question here, for both these dances exhibit these characteristics, which Xenophon is describing. I can also mention that the word oro, although found with slight variations in other languages, example in Romanian, oro, koras, or Jewish, oro, Greek, oros, or Bulgarian, oro, Serbian, kolo, it is actually an ancient Macedonian word meaning, quote, to jump around in a circle, end quote. This term may have been borrowed from the Thracians, which had the same meaning for the same word. The ancient oro was a wild, ecstatic, Dionysian dance with intricate, fast steps. Today, the Macedonian oro can be described in similar ways with measured, calculated, lively steps, leaps, turns, and in some of the richest and also with some of the richest choreographies in the world. The Macedonian dance group Tanis has won more international folk dance awards than perhaps any other group, with its marvelous spellbinding renditions of these Macedonian dances. The description of the ancient Macedonian dance, as described by Xenophon, is said to be the Rusalia by Pribicevic. In his examination of the text, he concludes it can only be this dance. Rusalia is a specifically Macedonian conversion dance, he states, and continues. Xenophon described this dance in his Anabasis some 2,300 years ago. Much later, Macedonian Slavs adopted it in the pagan Christian ritual symbolizing conversion. The Rusalia, as we know it today in Macedonia, is done as follows. Teams of 20 to 60 young men in pairs form a loose circle with 2 leaders in charge. All are dressed in white with short white skirts and fur caps, a red ornamented scarf across the chest. The dancers carry wooden swords. The leaders carry axes. Drummers and flautists provide the music. Sufficiently spaced, the dancers execute measured sword movements and slow motion steps and figures meant to bring about healing of the sick and a good harvest. Beginning with the first day of Christmas and for 12 days, the Rusalia was performed like a dramatic roadshow in various villages. To the sound of the music, with unsheathed swords pointed upward, the dancing team left its native village. Except for the 2 leaders, the dancers were committed to absolute silence for 12 days. No one was permitted to cross himself during these 12 days or to pray, for all were supposed to be pagan. The dancers were greatly honored in each village and invited to the bedside of sick persons over whose heads they crossed their swords for good health. When 2 teams of traveling Rusalia dancers met on the road, one team had to declare submission by pointing their swords downward and passing under the crossed swords of the other. Such surrender being considered most shameful, the Rusalia parties in the past used to wage regular wars, resulting in casualties. The dead were buried without ceremonies in the Rusalia cemeteries, which still exist. On the 12th day, the Rusalia group, having visited many places, returned to its native village. The dancers entered the church with their full caps on and their unsheathed wooden swords pointed upward. They walked up to the women's side of the aisle of the altar and stood still. The priest said a separate prayer before each man. The dancers then moved to the other end of the altar, pointed their swords downward in a sign that they revered the new faith, and their foreheads and swords were sprinkled with holy water. They then left the church, surrendered their swords, re-entered the church, and bareheaded and with candles in their hand, crossed themselves and kissed the cross. Upon their return to their homes, they got new clothes, and a long celebration began with a slaughter of a lamb. The Rusalia dancers did not travel anymore, and the whole ceremony is performed in the native village itself. The present-day dance is considerably reduced. Chesky Neceski describes the dance as follows. The Играорците се пуштени кога излегуваат на сцената и одат еден по друг, држејќи сабји во десната рака. Русалиското оро е едно од најдинамичните стари борбени ритуални ора од Јужна Македонија, што ја символизира борбата против неприродните сили. There is a description of this similar type of dance in the ancient Macedonian customs, where this dance was with the swords. What they were trying to do is trying to actually beat out evil spirits and send them away from the people. And therefore, we can see the connection when going into villages and the dancing occurs over the individual's heads, try to do away with evil spirits. Maybe I can take one brief minute here, at least play you a little bit of an example. I did have some overheads and stuff, but you can't use them, so let me see if I should. It's better if it's down. I hope you can hear this, but it's a very faint instrument. There are, well, it's a type of mandolina tambura. Where's kete? Tambura. Yeah, it's a type of tambura.
The music you just played, what period are we zeroing in?
The problem with that is
It sounds a bit Turco.
Yes.
Yes and no. I hope that perhaps later I can get into describing the tradition. But although we don't have any musical example, that's what the whole problem comes in. We don't know what the actual music of this time sounded like, because how can you describe it? Right? You can have words that describe the dancing, the leaping, and so on, but we have no musical notation, so we can't go and figure out what it was like. But again, what I'm trying to trace is the rhythmical characteristics, the describing of the dance, and to see how much of the dance actually changed. If the dance didn't really alter that much, what about the musical content? Okay. That's where the, it is a very vague field. It's difficult to know that. Yes?
This particular music, they seem to form in Calendar in Greece. They consider this particular music to be their own, all the way down in Calendar.
This particular music, I think a lot of, because a lot of cultures would probably try to claim there's certain styles and sounds that are very similar. Most of the instruments at least, that are on the Balkan Peninsula, a majority of them came from the Middle East, from the Arabic cultures, even back some 2,000, 3,000 years ago, or even 2,000, 3,000 years before Christ. For instance, this instrument, the zurla, its evidence of this is described in Egypt, time of the pharaohs, 3,000 years BC, okay, in a similar construction. Therefore, it migrated, came to the Balkans. A lot of cultures use this. The Turks use it. The Macedonians use it, the Greeks use it, Bulgarians use it, and also a lot of Arabic cultures use it. So, to try to trace it, it probably is an Egyptian instrument. This has also been found in remote parts of China. So it has, where the actual origination of this is, I don't know. Certain instruments, because of their construction, produce certain style of music. Okay? Each culture brings its own to it, but if you listen to it, you could probably say that this music sounds like so-and-so, or you could say that music sounds like this. I will also talk a little bit later about the actual division of the notes on each instrument, okay? And how that is very much different than what we have today in the Western world. And each culture has its own way of actually changing these. And this here is a very specific Macedonian instrument. Its tuning is slightly different than the Turkish tuning. In that, don't want to get into the physics of acoustics, but it has to do with taking a note, for instance, take that note, and then play what is known as an octave higher, and then from that, you start to divide the octave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, plus the open. Okay, so this instrument divides the octave in 13. Our Western classical music, of which now is taken on by a lot of cultures, divides the actual octave into 12. There are things that, other instruments which divide it more, 15, 17, 19, 8, 20, into all these different steps that you could divide it, and that's unique to each specific culture. I hope that explains. Now, perhaps also maybe you should mention, since I played that, I gave you the rhythmical example with the speech, maybe I should illustrate what rhythm this piece was. Any takers, any guesses?
You have to do, could be 7/16 or 9/16.
7/16, 9/16. Getting close.
7/8.
Well, the division of the bottom, whether it's an 8 or 16, I think doesn't really concern us, but what the actual groupings are. Remember when we spoke of the binary and ternary? This is a grouping of a ternary, okay, and then two binaries, two binaries. So the actual rhythm is da 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 dee da dee dee da da da, which is a total of. Add them all up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11. Right? So this is an 11 here.
11.
Now, whether you divided the 16 at the bottom number is getting perhaps more complicated than we need to for here. The main grouping for us is the top number, because the bottom number delineates the kind of note that would get one of those beats. But for us, the top is the interesting one, because that is now giving us the overall structure of the music and the repetitive cycle, because everything in life has a cycle. The 2 pattern that I talked about, the binary, is a cycle of 2, 1, 2, and it repeats. So for this music, it has a cycle which is made up of a group of 3 plus 2 sets of 2. 1, 2, 1, 2 as a unit, 1, 2, 1, 2. And now depending on the speed, because this is actually a moderate tempo, somewhere in the middle, it'd probably be easier to take that as going the 1, 2, 3, take it as a unit, so you have 1, then these 4 as a unit, those 4 as a unit, so therefore you actually have 3 groups. But it is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And that continuously repetitive pattern. See if I can try playing it again. You can hear it. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. current cycle. A sad note is given to this by Stanimir Vyshinsky in the book The Ensemble Tanis, The Dances of Macedonia here, when they describe this specific dance. They say, quote, "This piece is not performed by other groups in Macedonia, and furthermore, in 1988, Rusali dancing in the villages is no longer performed in its original context. Only a couple of village groups continue to demonstrate the dances in festival programs. After several thousand years of existence, in an almost unchanged form, the dance is about to disappear from the Macedonian folk dancing repertoire. Only professional groups like Tanis are keeping the tradition alive, as most young Macedonians don't care for such old-style dancing." That's a little bit of the ancient history. Now we'll go maybe a little bit closer ancient history. In part two, I want to deal with the arrival of the Slavs and in the early church pre-Ottoman period. As is the case in antiquity, so it is with the arrival of the new group of Slavs on the Balkan Peninsula around the 6th century AD. The musical heritage of Macedonia in this period is poorly documented. From ancient times, Slavs were known as a musical people. Many writings contain information about Slavic dances and performers, which could be found from the Byzantine centers all the way to German feudal courts. They played the same role that other medieval jugglers, minstrels, and actors assumed. Finding themselves at the bottom of the social hierarchy, many times supported by feudal lords, and sold together with the land and possessions, driven out by the church leaders because of their perpetuation of free-thinking ideas and ideals regarding the social hierarchy, these medieval actors and musicians found their livelihood in the needs of their contemporaries for song, dance, and entertainment. When a troupe rolled into town, they attracted the entire population, therefore drawing it away from, even temporarily, the clergy and their own toils. Through song, music, and dance, these traveling musicians entertained the people, at the same time thumbing their noses at the holy dignitaries. Dragoslav Portakov, in his book, The Musical Artistry of Macedonia, states that, quote, "Their satirical couplets represented a highly critical look at the social strata and at the governing bodies." However, these same musicians whose satirical dramas and songs ridiculed their bosses also worked at the feudal courts. These courts tried to imitate the courts of the Byzantine imperialists and of the European kingdoms. Especially during the Crusade, a string of traveling musicians and actors together with the armies traveled from one territory to another, always familiarizing themselves with the norms of the foreign court customs. They exchanged their artistic experiences, bringing to the land cultural sharing between separated national circles. These traveling musicians from the South Slav peoples were both bearers of the old Slavic musical culture. In their artistry, says Ortakov, was interwoven the spirit of the national song transposed to the new regions from the Carpathian fatherlands. Regarding this music, we have almost no record, but from that which remains, the relationship is clear. Music enjoyed a healthy and high position in the life of these newly arrived tribes on the Balkan Peninsula. There is one document in particular that is cited in many journals, and that is the passage from the Chronicles by Theophilak Simokat, the Byzantine writer of the 6th century. It describes the dances, the chance meeting between the guards of the Byzantine king Mavriki and 3 Slavs. At the border of Byzantine, near the city Inaton, the guards captured these Slavs who, instead of having weapons, had only guitars. They told the king that their people had no knowledge of arms, but to their hearts, music was held more dearly than war. How true that statement may have been, whether they actually said that, I don't know, but this is the quote. But at least the connection is clear and can be made between the use of specific instruments and their ancestral lineage, as well as the meaning and the role of the music in the culture of these people. The Slavs who settled in Macedonia for the most part kept their pagan traditions and ceremonial songs and dances, or they would accommodate them according to the new social conditions, eventually combine them with the Christian religion. Their folk arts and moral culture in general, as well as the culture of other ethnic groups on the territory of Macedonia, for instance, the ancient Macedonians, assimilated and together helped spread the Christian canonical rituals. These string of old customs, dances, and traditions, accompanied by music, for instance, such as the Rusalia, were kept until our present day, changing with the influence of Christian traditions and morals. Of course, the church did not look kindly upon these pagan traditions. However, it had to accept the level that these traditions were embedded in the culture of the people. Rather than changing these traditions, it clothed them in the Christian dress. These pagan traditions were maintained by the biggest foes of the church, primarily the heretics, who were fighting for social justice. They went against the feudalist lords and against the church hierarchy and its dogmas. Regarding the music of the Macedonian heretics, we learn from priest Vitor Kozma, who in his discourse against the heretics, among other things, states, "They cannot be Christians who with fiddles, dances, and heretic songs drink wine, believe in meetings in dreams, and who knows what other satanic theologies." Ortakov comments that, quote, his assault on the pagan folk traditions of the Slav where the music had a dominant function, clearly speaks of an intrusion and infiltration of the folk traditions into the ordered rituals of the Byzantine holy songs. Therefore, we can see that the newly arrived Slavs, together with the original Macedonians who lived in Macedonia, kept their strong traditions and customs. But rather than negating one over the other, main characteristics of each would be maintained, and a new, synthesized whole would be produced, incorporating strengths of each custom. These gestures and minstrels were primarily peasants who, blessed with a musical gift, found an outlet in the courts as well as in the town squares. How their music changed is not really clear, but strong roots must have been maintained of their folk music, with occasional additions of other novelties from the interaction with foreign court minstrels. The fact that we have musical numbers such as the Rusalia surviving today clearly speaks of the level these traditions were embedded in the folk customs of the people. The study of Macedonian music in the Middle Ages leads us in the direction of Slavic literacy, which of course was the Slavic Macedonian language. Our motherland, states Ortakov, as a cradle for Slavic literacy, was simultaneously the epicenter for the holy music, as well as a bastion for saints whose role was to convert the masses by propagating and strengthening the new religion amongst the Slavic tribes to the north and northeast. There is no doubt, he continues, that the Byzantine holy songs with sacred text translated by the Solon brothers is the beginning of the Slavic church music and musical literacy. Through the acclamation of these songs to the new text, which, with respect to the metrical, rhythmical construction of the language, we truly get the first specifics of a Slavic and Macedonian sacred singing. And with the absence of markings in the first handwritten copies, the evidence very convincingly shows that the great number of the translated liturgical texts were musically rendered. We can still see this in the Macedonian church services of today, where everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the priest is canted. The fact that the origin of these songs was Macedonian is supported by the Russian Cyrillic Ostromirovo Evangelie from the year 1057, which shows that the original document was from the Ohrid school. Thanks to a revived study of this period by Macedonian musicologists, much information has come to light. The brothers Cyril and Methody, as universally learned people of their time, were well aware of the theoretical and practical singing style of the Eastern churches. Cyril, with his musical knowledge, was also a composer of musical pieces, such that his hymn on Clement of Rome, which became so popular in his day, was learned and sung throughout the lands. Macedonia enjoyed a healthy growth period during the time of St. Clement of Ohrid and after in the time of King Samuel, with the compilation of printed liturgical texts, which were in the reflective phonetic notational system. And if I had transparency, we could look at these. It wasn't atypical, even before the 11th century, along the Ohrid rim, to have collections whose texts were accompanied with a type of Byzantine notation as a result of the previously exuberant development and advancement of the Macedonian literary language. We see evidence of this exuberance started with the Salonika brothers, continued in the writings of St. Clement and his people St. Naum toward the end of the 9th and beginning of the 10th centuries AD. and also continued by their pupils, thus affirming the so-called Ohrid school. Beside the obvious valuable gains in literature and literacy for the Macedonian people, as well as educating and Christianizing the Slavs, this school also shows immeasurable value for the musical culture of Macedonia. Evidence of this is in the fact that because of over 3,500 pupils who graduated from this Ohrid school as clergy and cantors, the Macedonian musical culture, through sacred song and style of singing, was spread even to the farthest regions of the Slavic lands. About St. Clement's opus, much is written, in as well as outside of Macedonia. In regards to the musical output, he was an inventive individual. He composed songs in honor of many saints, as well as the Virgin Mother. St. Clement also gave to Macedonia the first Pentecost, that is, a collection of songs to be sung between Velikden and Duhovden. The first Slavic church singing school was also formed in Macedonia. With his music, we observe that the Slavic folk music elements brought to the sacred singing in the earliest period were taken from the closest familiar elements to him, or rather, the folk musical traditions of Macedonia, claims Ottoman. Therefore, some correlation existed between the church music and the folk music of the Macedonians, although how closely related it is difficult to say because of the religious views on music and how it should be sung. But it is also a known fact that the Byzantine yokes were hard to abandon, primarily because of the closeness of Macedonia to the strongest Byzantine centers, as well as the religious influence Byzantine had over the Slavic peoples. However, after the fall of King Samuel and his kingdom, Byzantine, jealous with the vitality of the Ohrid school and afraid of losing control, begins to disseminate the services and begins to position Greek archbishops in Macedonian centers, especially in Ohrid. These archbishops almost immediately begin to destroy the St. Clement collections, and those which were not destroyed at the time were moved out of the country. However, these were also lost in time. Of the more beautiful ones, they were translated into Greek and were taken as being Greek. Services which up to this time were performed in Macedonian are now changed into Greek. The Macedonian and Slavic literature in this period receives a bombardment of Hellenism, with the introduction of the Greek language in worship and everyday life. With the onslaught of the Ottomans, Macedonian literary life, once the most glorified in the Balkans and the Byzantine Empire, dwindles, such that by the beginning of the 19th century, there are no Macedonian writers or poets other than the folk singers, and we almost have to start fresh. Now maybe. Now I can also briefly look at the folk music of this pre-Ottoman Empire. This is the part which almost no record exists, other than the comment from the Byzantine Archbishop Theophylact. He mentions that in Ohrid, a need exists for a musical plan because he predicts the masses whose songs speak of the spirit of resistance against the foreigners will influence the Macedonian archbishops. In this account, we see the strong sense of nationalism amongst the Macedonians toward Hellenism, as well as other occupatory forces. Even though it has been several generations since King Samuel's death, the people, seeing of the will to be free, to continue the resistance against the oppressors, and to cleanse themselves of the shackles of the despots in their land. Well, isn't this a common story of our people? In the first half of the 14th century, or year actually 1325 to be exact, on a diplomatic mission, Nikophoros Gregoras recorded the following. While traveling along the river Struma, his fellow travelers began to sing Tragica melody, or sad songs, mentioning their national heroes' movements. This is clearly an eyewitness account of national epic traditions, which shows their existence before the Ottoman occupation, which for years was thought to be the beginning of such cycles. This Byzantine historian continues by adding that these beautiful melodies and songs, which he heard in the regions, were of a deep tradition with which he was not familiar. During the Easter holiday, Gregoras was in the Strumica region, where he had the opportunity to witness folk traditions with songs and dances as performed by both young and old people. He mentions that the unique rhythms these songs and dances from the Strumica region contain. This leads us to conclude that one of the primary principal characteristics of the Macedonian folk music, its specific metrical rhythmical component, was represented in a separate phase of its development in the Macedonian folkloric creation well before the 14th century. With the fall of Macedonia under Turkish rule, the continuity of the written epic and the growth of the literary culture is rent. There is even a cessation of the minstrels who were previously supported by the courts and the feudalist lords. These are replaced by festivals brought over by the new fiefdom lords, corresponding with the Islamic holy days. In the rich courts of the Turkish lords, built soon after their arrival, were employed instrumental ensembles with a typical Oriental flavor, whose influence remained, but primarily in the city musical and folkloristic tradition, rather than the outlying regions. This process of influence is most heavily prevalent during the periods of Vicinian Islamization of the Macedonian people. The termination of the previously intensive fostering of the Macedonian music and notational systems unintentionally brought forth a concentration on the national folk psyches. As Firfol states in his book, Likot na Makedonskata narodna muzika, and I'll switch into Macedonian for a little bit here. Тоа бегство во пазувите на гордиот традиционализам во светот на живата и животворната народна уметност представува психолошка подлога на една масовна борба за опстанок, која и покрај сета своја суровост не е лишена од радоста за посвета перспектива. Во услови на Macedonian reading still has to improve a little bit. Во услови на подчинетост на народот и сурова животна стварност се создале циклуси на македонски епски песни, што ги величат најславните јунаци на отпорот против угнетувачот. Централната личност на македонскиот епос Марко Крале во народното творештво добила безпримерна сила и јунаштво. Тој е најпопуларниот епски јунак на македонците, а познат е и во епската традиција на други балкански народи. Од другите народни јунаци во македонскиот епос, најпојќе е од Отејан Момчил Војвода. Заедничкиот основен мотив на песните за Марко, Момчил и за други легендарни великани е физичката борба против турците. Тој мотив со текот на времето квалитетно се менува во одделена група ајдучки и комикски песни, кои говорат за народната борба за слобода. Главните јунаци на овие песни се војводи на востаничките чети и борци против разни насилници. Познати се песните за Идол Војвода, Кузман Капитан, Сирма Војвода и за други заштитници на народот. Сите овие песни, како и други примери на стара епска традиција, во одделени варијанти имаат локални обележија со влијанијата на народната лирика. Во музички поглед, тие се изведуваат на 4 начини. Во придружувањето на кемене, на гајда, на тамбура или пак без никаква придружба. Од пеенето на овие музички еписи, еден патописец која го почувствувал необичната магичност на македонската песна, ни кажува Драгослав Ортаков, ја нарекол Македонија како земја на песните. Па сепак се чини, продолжува Ортаков, дека таа поради неповолните историски околности останала недоволно позната до денес. Наневски во неговата книга Љубовни народни песни за истата тема мисли дека иако можела одамна да биде драгоцен феноменен од една мала поетска тера инкогнита во големото единство и искуство на европската поезија, досега само во трагика се најдува. Македонската лирика, овие зборови за македонската народна лирика не се однесуваат само за најзината текстуална компонента, туку и за музичката, без која не може да се зборува за интегралното екзистирање на песната како фолклорна творба. Тематиката на македонските лирски песни се состои од цела низа мотиви кои излегуваат во сите области на човечкиот живот. Оваа тематика би можеле да ја разделиме во неколку групи. И тоа, 1. Работни песни, во кои спаѓаат овчарски, жетварски и разни занаечиски. Број 2. Песни во кои се зборуваат за природните појави и за односот на човекот кон природата, како самоилови, црковни и друго. 3. Семени песни, свадбени, жалбени и друго. 4. Љубовни песни, со подвид што можеме да ги ставиме исто и во други групи. 5. Смешни, хумористични песни. 6. Печалбарски песни, кои представуваат специфична македонска група и во кои се изнесуваат тешката судбина на македонскиот човек, принуден да бара вработување во туѓина. И 7. Патриотски македонски песни. Метроритмишкото богатство, особено во песните со неравноделни тактови структури, е една од најзначајните карактеристики на македонската народна песна. Не помалку е истакната и нејзината мелодиска компонента. Во постара селска фолклорна традиција, длабоко изграност се постигнува со необичните тонски елементи, од кои се разликуваат од западниот систем. Половина степен е нормално делење на музичката октава во Западот. Но во Македонија, четврт, пак и помал дел е нормален, како што кажав пред малце. Вакви линии на октавата, на вакви делинија на октавата, кажува ортаков, со истакнувањето на одделени тонови на исто стапало во фолклорот, со нивното повторување, доведува до психолошка напнатост и не упатува на старите облици на култните песни. А исто така многу печатливи се безмерздурните напеви, кои често пати имаат меланхолично обележие. Нивното слободно архитектонско обликување базира врз врстата внатрешна логика на поетската целина. Кон ова треба и да го додадеме богатството на народните инструменти и инструменталните мелодии со нивната специфична ornamentация. Now, at this point in time, seeing how I've talked for a considerable length, I'll concentrate more on the playing of examples and explaining the rhythmical guises in relation to everything I've said so far. But just before I do, I want to bring myself to the present. Okay. With the renewed nationalism at the end of the 19th century, more heroic epic songs prevailed, as do the Pechalbarski songs, because of the political and economic plight of the Macedonian nation. Throughout it all, the peasant tradition remained, by whom these songs were primarily written and sung. Although Macedonia is in the center of the Balkans, and therefore a bridge and a crossroad from Europe to the Middle East, it maintained its nationalism and culture in spite of the repeated attempts of change by its foes. Whether this is primarily due to the fact that the majority of the population lived in small, remote villages, which travelers had to go through great length and imposing mountains to reach them, or because of the strong sense of national identity, is difficult to say for certain, but it's probably a combination of the two. One would think that with such traffic through your territory, you would assimilate more of the other cultures in your own. This is true for some of the major cities, like Skopje, for instance, with its dominant Turkish Islamic life during the Ottoman occupation. But even so, only minor Orientalisms were absorbed by the music of Skopje. It is true that the musicians played both styles of music, Macedonian and Turkish. However, very few influences of one filtered into the other. This can be seen in many other cultures, such as in Afghanistan, where in Afghani villages, where the local bar musicians switched from Islamic music to the regular Afghani and Russian without any difficulty, and the music remains true to the style they played. I can also personally vouch for this, seeing how I played many folk styles in my life. It is not difficult for me to render a purely Romanian song and immediately switch to an Italian tune, then say go into a Macedonian one, and at the same time employing melodic and ornamental originality of the culture in question. The purity of the Macedonianism is also evident in our dances, not only our songs. I have shown how these dances from ancient times have remained with only slight modification. And this is primarily due to the amalgamation of two cultures which had a desire to amalgamate. Even though our Macedonian forefathers were forced to speak Greek and have the holy books read to them in Greek and have Hellenistic tendencies imposed on them, not to mention the occupation of the Turks and so on, the testimony to their purity is the maintenance of the language, the culture, the music, dance, poetry, their way of life, their fears, their celebrations, all of which, among others, help give them a strong national identity. The biggest contribution, claims Ortakov, that the Orient gave to Macedonian music is the augmented second interval. What that is this. Would be what the Macedonians would normally play, but the Orientalism is this. Okay, that is the augmented second interval. And with this I would agree. However, what worries me is not the past, but the future. Within the last 2 decades, I have observed the infiltration in Macedonian music of greater Orientalisms, primarily in the melodic and rhythmical structures, to the point that I can tell you here today that I do not consider this Macedonian music. It is the popular stuff that is composed, or rather, stolen from Arabic cultures, with the addition of Macedonian words that is being recorded by young Macedonian musicians, without any consideration of the future outcome of such trends. The ornaments, the melodic shape, the harmonic language, the rhythm are all non-Macedonian, and if you ask me, are all fairly benign. The influence of the West through media is also destroying our cultural identity. I quoted earlier the disappearance of the Rusalia dance from the villages. It is only danced at festivals now. This is sad, for it has been moved from the heart of the and breadth of the people and has been turned into a prostitutionalized exhibition. It might as well go into a museum. I'm not knocking the need to have this dance danced by professional ensembles, for we need these ensembles to showcase our culture to the world. But I am saddened when this is all that I see. The place where it should remain in the everyday life of the people, it no longer does. And Kit is not here. I'm sure if he were here, he would agree and speak to this as well. It is extremely tragic to me, for instance, when I play dances, and our own Macedonian dances, dance these dances in the most rudimentary ways, yet foreigners, for instance, First Nations people, Asian people, Latinos, everyone, gather in separate groups and dance them and outdo the Macedonians by doing them in the truly folkloristic and intricate ways, which were passed down through generations in our history. This is sad indeed for us to know that we've reached this stage. I've been blessed, and I thank my father greatly for giving me this gift of my national heritage through music. I'll later explain how I use some of these Macedonian rhythmic elements in my contemporary classical music that I write. Now, let's not forget what our national hero Goethe Belge said when he expressed his vision of the world in this way. He said, "I see the world as a place where only cultural competition will exist between the peoples." That is why I applaud the efforts of Kete and others like him who tirelessly perpetuate our culture and keep it alive and at the forefront. Our Macedonian communities must unite, for we too easily find things to divide us. I know this is not a pleasant pill to swallow, but we all know that it's truthful. We need, as a community here and in other parts of the world, to unite as one voice to proclaim who we are and be proud of our identity and fully support the efforts of those who bring our culture to the forefront. We will not win any sympathy by holding placards and disrupting the lives of other citizens, but in an intellectual way, on cultural claims, here we can do our most effective campaign for the recognition of our nation and our identity. We have a very rich heritage, which we should all be proud of. Let's bring it to the foreground and celebrate it in dance, song, and music. Thank you. Seeing how this took up, it was very dry because it didn't have too many other examples with it. Are there any questions on this first? Does anybody want to have? Yes?
I was just wondering about the Gaida.
The Gaida, yes?
Yeah, that's mainly the Macedonian. Does it go down to the Greek
Um, the Gaida itself is found in actually a lot of cultures. We need to look at the Celts, Scots, that area as well. But this Gaida that is found in the Macedonian region, I think, is slightly different in its construction. Again, it has to do with the spacing of the holes and therefore the kind of tone that it produces. Of course, the Greeks say that they have this in their region, but I don't know Greek history that well to tell you when actually that arrived or if it was there before or not. It would be my assumption with the ancient part of Macedonia falling under Greek rule and the systemized Hellenization, that probably it is a Macedonian instrument that's been taken into. But I can't answer that.
Well, I was talking, you mentioned Kopirko.
Yes.
He was living at my wife's house for 5 months when he was over here.
Oh,
And we got into a conversation.
what was
with
his
the guy
conclusion? What was his conclusion about the Gaida?
It's Macedonian.
That it is Macedonian. That's what I would assume as well.
I asked the
But
question whether they used it in the army, like the Scotch. Because in Scotland, they have a guy that
right.
It says Macedonian.
Right.
Now, I'm an amateur archaeologist and historian. And when I'm studying the vases, I was shocked to see one of the dances done in St. Clemens. The girls put their arms like this. And they do this because I saw this on the Mycenaean vases. And they thrust this in Italy. That kind of holes. But I don't let the dancers realize it goes that far back.
I don't know. It is a problem. I mean, I think all of us are lacking in how much we know of our rich culture and history. Again, like I said, I would assume that it is a Macedonian instrument that was later Hellenized, but I cannot say for certain. That's not my field, so I can't, don't quote me on that. Yeah, I can tell you my preferences. Yes?
Doesn't the Gaida exist also in Greek and Turkish culture?
I do believe that there is in Turkish culture the Gaida. Historically, going back, how the Gaida existed, I'm talking, say, let's say 2,000, 2,500 years ago.
Going back even to Mesopotamia and Indies and places like that. I mean, I had a very interesting reflection of reverse introduction, you want to call it. In the Edinburgh Festival, what shows up is a Punjabi military band playing a bagpipe in a Scottish style, if you please, but playing Punjabi tunes. So you
okay, but for that now, I wonder how historical that is, or is that basically by the
British
by the
introduction.
British?
Oh yeah,
right, British introduction.
obviously that would happen that way, yeah.
But now, I mean, we're going back probably longer to our own history here. Maybe I can play another example of a noro, and we can try. I want to accentuate two things here. This oro, I will play it on the accordion first a little bit. Listen for the tuning, in other words, the spacing of the notes. Then listen to it played by kaval, Macedonian kaval. And then I'll try to see if I can superimpose my playing on that so you can see the discrepancy between because this accordion is tuned to the Western style. So maybe we can look at that.
Yeah.
wider than that is. And then yet some pitches there are in wider space than this is. So this is where the difference is. And I think you can hear the Orientalism in the melody. But yet, it is not really evident there. Okay? And that is the makeup of the actual instrument itself. And for instance, the critter who borrowed it did it through his own system, which he was familiar with. Right? And this Orientalism is not really in this music. Okay? We can finish that. Any takers on the rhythm?
I'm helping to organize the conference that is going to be presented at the University of Toronto, which is the 3rd North American Macedonian Conference on Language, Literature, and Folklore. And I'm sure that you've read about it in the Macedonian paper, and perhaps heard about it on the Macedonian program. But in case you haven't, there are about 15 academics coming from North America that, surprise of all surprises, they actually specialize on Macedonian language and culture and folklore. I mean, there are people through North America that actually speak Macedonian and they aren't born to it. And we have about 8 academics that are coming from Skopje. There is a full 3 days of lectures. I have a list of the lectures that are going to be presented. They're anywhere from 9:30 or 10 o'clock on from Thursday, that's June the 12th, 13th, and 14th, which is a couple weeks away. The lectures are, for the 3 days, are $90. There is a reception on Saturday at the university as well. That's $25 from 5:30 to 7:30. Or you can make it on an individual basis if you find that you can't make it for each day. And Thursday and Friday, they are $25 each. So in other words, Thursday will be $25, Friday will be $25, and Saturday is $65 and $25 for the banquet. For those that are holding the 3-day seminar ticket, there is a movie, and it's included in the price on Friday night at the university again, and it is called, and it's a Macedonian movie with English subtitles called Happy New 1949. And apparently, I think this one was one of the an Oscar nomination in 1986 from Yugoslavia. It's at Emmanuel College. I have a copy of the program, and you can have a look at it after. I'll be available for tickets if you would like, or if you want to buy them at the door, that's fine. But it is limited seating, and it's for people who are interested in much of this, and not everything will be of interest, obviously. At times it's quite academic, but on the Saturday, I got to tell you, we've got people like Victor Friedman coming, Lauren Danny Danforth, Dr. Lillian Petrov, Michael Serafino, who is from Skagit Valley College, who's speaking on Macedonian and the Internet. Another Professor Philip Shashko, who is speaking on the interdiction of language and the crime of song, interrogating legal documents and other texts. And many of the lectures will be, not many, but obviously the people from Macedonia will be speaking in Macedonian, but many of the academics understand Macedonian. And they're coming from Harvard, from University of Chicago, from California, Toronto, and the person who will be making the opening remarks is a professor emeritus, Horace Lunt from Harvard University, who is going to be speaking on 45 years since the publication of the Grammar of Macedonian Language, and he is the grandfather of Macedonian linguistics in North America. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, maybe what we can do is speed this up a little bit. And I've been told, because of a lack of time, what we're going to do is I'll play you a little bit of my examples, my own music, and describe briefly some of those elements. I'll read to you a poem that I wrote that I turned into a song. It's called Zemljo Makedonio. Zemljo Makedonio, vekovi porobena. Zemljo Makedonio, vekovi izmačena. Ej, zemljo stara, moja najmila. Ej, do koga toliko ti je trpiš? Digni raka, digni glas, razbudi se ovoj čas. Vikni pirin, vikni egej, vardarski. Site brajka složni smo. Idealog na goce vlade je za naša država Makedonija, zemlja na Balkanu. Prv so pesma za sloboda, zapej brat od Vardarac. Glasoj brajke na široko, po pirinot i egejot. Ej, dragi brajke Makedonci, do koliko vijek je trpite? Digni raka, digni glas, razbudi se ovoj čas. Vikni pirin, vikni egej, vardarski. Site brajke složni se, idealot na goce vlade, za naša država Makedonija, zemlja na Balkanu. Ajde brajke zajedno, nije da se združime. Naša sloboda varame i nije da živejeme. Bo naša zemlja Makedonija, večna bidi Makedonija. I took this poetry and set it to actual Macedonian folk style. And for it, I used first kaval, and you'll hear that at the beginning. And also in this I used a gaida, a traditional Macedonian instrument. And along that I arranged it for my band, and we recorded this. And it was performed at the festival in '94, the Makan Festival here, held in Toronto. And it won first place from the public, not from the jury. The jury didn't think it was worthy, but at least the public enjoyed it.
That's beautiful.
There it is.
Besides writing in the traditional style, I would probably say my forte, my strengths are in classical, and that's what my degrees are in, writing modern classical music. I had a comment even before this lecture began from an individual who said, "We're not going to listen to that tonal stuff, are we?"
I'll own up to that.
Not to get into the arguments between style and taste.
Well, it's about time we had the class.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Okay. But one thing about this is modern classical music. It's not the style of Mozart. It's not the style of Tchaikovsky, who wasn't a classicist anyway. It's not the style of Bach, who wasn't a classicist. So they had different styles of their own. This is the modern language of music progressing. It would be frightening, I think, if we looked at a musical culture somewhere else, outside of this world, let's say another musical culture, and in its 2 million years, if we take that as a number, it had not developed at all. I would think that would be frightening at all. You know. So therefore, what we face today is a lot of opposition against this modern, so-called atonal, which is a misnomer anyway, because there's no such thing as atonality. It was someone who didn't know what this new style was who labeled it such. Not to get into that, what I will do is do 2 songs very briefly, 2 pieces that I wrote. Shouldn't call them songs. Since I started with poetry, maybe I can also begin the other one that was poetically based on a poem that I wrote. Macedonka explained it earlier at the beginning of the lecture. I started to think about my youthful days in Macedonia and in Philip. And the memories that kept coming back was during the lunch period. My father would come back from work, and after lunch, he would go take a nap, and inevitably would also take me as a hostage to nap with him. The radio would be on at exactly 1 o'clock, and it would begin with Macedonian folk music. The first sign that I waited for was, of course, his snoring, and I was out of there. But in those 5 minutes or so, by the time it took him to fall asleep, what I remembered was the music, the style that kept day after day after day filtering in my ear, and it became a part of me. Not to mention that I missed those days tremendously. That's even an understatement. But this was the idea that I had, and this was the mind that I was in when I wrote this. And I'm thinking back of my previous days. The valley, nestled within imposing mountains, beckons me to return to my youth. Memories fill my waking thoughts and draw me to a place I once knew, once loved, once lived and enjoyed. Somehow, though, the memories are not what they used to be. The images are not as clear and as defined. A hazy mist fills the gap between myself and my memories as a child, playing a game amongst those valleys, nestled within those imposing mountains. The rain, seen and heard in the distance, draws near. My bones feel its approach, my body throbbing. My memories of raindrops on a warm summer evening anticipate heat, but the raindrops against my skin feel cold as they trickle down my face. Alas, my eyes have dried up as well, and the only memory I have left is amidst the veils the rain grows cold. So when I started to think more of this piece, I thought, how can I best describe a memory? So what I did was I took and set this piece for a harp. the harp itself is very mellow. It begins with a wild gush from the harp. It just, right? What that's representing for me is a vision of the mountains falling into the valley. Again, how do I get the memory idea behind it? What I do is I take a note on a harp, pluck it, because that's how the harp plays it, by plucking it. That produces the actual tone itself. Now, there's ways of getting what are known as harmonics. If you actually take the string and you stop it lightly at a certain point, you can get the actual, what is known as an overtone or harmonic of that individual tone. So what you get is you get the real tone, and then by plucking it this way, you get the overtone, which is, it's weaker, it's a little more in the distance, and these are the ideas that I play with. I'm trying to present this music and try to get this music going. And the other thing I thought was, well, I need to take something of my past to put it in there. So I took and I disseminated a melody, Jovano Jovanke. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Now, the piece itself never fully gives you Jovano Jovanke. And of course, the reason for that is not that I don't know the song, but I'm trying to reconstruct it, and I'm thinking, when you have a memory, not all the pieces fit. And therefore, you take one idea, and where memory lacks, you substitute something of your own. So it begins with this very disseminated melody, and gradually as the piece moves along, near the end, we get a rendition of this Jovano Jovanke melody, which is not the real thing, but it's as though this is the way my brain remembers it. This is the idea of the piece. It's too long to play totally. So what I'll try to do is at least perhaps maybe play a little bit at the beginning, and then try to get to the end so that you can hear the Jovano Jovanke, and then we'll see about a tonality after. hope you could hear parts of it. Lastly, I'd like to wrap up with the title track of the CD. It's called The Prophets of Pella. Let me proceed this by telling you how it came about. While I was studying at the University of Pennsylvania, there was an ethnomusicologist from Australia who was setting up a music festival, and he wanted to try to combine folk instruments with traditional Western instruments, and to see what kind of music might be derived. And along that line, what he wanted to do is commission specific pieces that would try to amalgamate these two worlds. So at the same time, I was also thinking of my dissertation, and at that time I had very grandiose ideas of doing a dissertation, which was I thought I would do an operatic cycle, actually of 3 operas on the life of Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander. So instead of doing 3 operas, I wrote a piece for 3 orchestras. So that was a slight change, because I wanted to get out of there sooner. Now, I thought, how would I begin this whole operatic cycle? And The Prophets of Pella is the genesis of this movement. I took a military tent and I set up the tent on stage. And this is where it's a commander's tent, the king's tent. Philip is sleeping in a corner. The idea of the piece came that why not have a series of prophets who, when it was done in Philadelphia, we used English. When it was done in Amsterdam, we used Dutch. The second part of the vision describes his, first they say that, you will have a son, a mighty son, a great son, Alexander. You are mighty, but he will be great. Now the second part is still a dream, but now Philip's subconscious gets the better of him. And he starts to think in his head, what is about to happen? What does this prophecy mean? And if you were king at that time, think of Macbeth, or any tragedy like that, what you think is, if your offspring is going to become the king, they will do it through regicide, by eliminating you. So his second part is a frenzied, sporadic craziness of the subconscious mind taking effect of him. And that's what the piece is, and that of course sets up my duality and my conflict in the entire dramatic cycle. Philip against Alexander, and the two, obviously, historical records show that they did not have the greatest of relationships. So this is how I began the piece. Now also, for the traditional side of the instruments, I decided to use, first I thought of actually using the mountain flute, this thing. There are not too many Western players who could play this. So I changed, and I used also a rare instrument that is not really used in Western classical orchestras. It is the bass flute. It is a very long and thick flute instrument that is interesting to wind around. The tone is very, very close, and the timbre is very close to this instrument here. So I used that. I used the traditional flute. Then I also, instead of using the zurla, I used a oboe, which is the closest in Western instruments. And along that, I also used an old Macedonian drum. And these were my traditional instruments. What I also decided to do is this individual, Manolita Mora, he told me that there was a Balkan group, a Macedonian group, which sang Balkan songs, or female songs, a choir in Brisbane. So I thought, okay, why not use that? And that's how I can get my words across as well, and the idea, and propagate the plot. So I used a Balkan style singing, the Macedonian style of singing of the chorus. Now I tried to make it into what I wanted to express. Since we don't have historical records of the music of that time, I'm trying to think of what the music was like. This is my rendition of what it might have sounded like. But this is how the piece begins, very softly. The choir just hums along, and that is slowly, when it's staged, as Philip is sleeping, the choir almost enters, or the chorus almost enters from nowhere. You just hear this choral sound, but you don't know where it's coming from. And eventually they present their little song. So I'll play a little bit of that for you. I hope you like it. This is The Prophets of Pella.
I'll be very short. Basically, I want to say to all those people who have not paid membership, to pay their membership. We need more members, and you're welcome to become members. You know that it includes $15 for the year. It's only $15.
1 year.
And the $15 go a long way. As you know, this is organized by the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society, and we have to keep up things like this going. It's basically our tradition. Well, I also like to really thank Zivce for his lecture. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I am really proud, and I think we all should be proud of Macedonians to have a young man like this who has achieved greatly, and he's got a whole life ahead of him to achieve a lot more. Lectures like this in the future. Thank you very much again. There's also a CD, The Prophets of Pella, which is it here for sale?
Yes.
Okay. Whoever wants to purchase one, it's available at a very reasonable price of $15. In the stores is I think we're $20.90, almost $21 plus tax. So you're looking at probably, you know, well over $23, $24. So for $15, I must say it's a real steal.
And there are proceeds that do go down.
Yes, maybe you want to fill in on that. I don't know the details.
Well, and $2 go to the Historical Society. Now, don't we sound like Channel 17?
But you won't keep in that channel.
Don't we sound like now we just put in a little bit of advertising in between. But I just want to say, does anybody have any questions? For Zivce or for something to do with the lecture or? Well, I just would like to thank Zivce. It was a great honor for us to have him here and talk about his music, talk about his he's a young Mozart here. He's such a young person here, and he's achieved so much, and I think that is a recognition, and his music is based on the Macedonian music, and as I said before, you can hear it in the Prophets of Pella, and this is what he envisions in his pieces, and I think it's just a great honor. I thought this would have made an excellent presentation at the conference of Slavistics also, because it's so good, it's so academic, and it's really interesting. Well, thank you to everybody for coming.
Where can I find the book here?